Hello world! Patricia O'Connor and Frida Reba Darcy here. It is a spectacular, absolutely beautiful looking weekend here at our little balcony. And today I'm going to revisit something. It's like, I think it was over a year ago I did a video about watering. And watering Japanese black pines was tricky. The first thing I learned was I was told by somebody who was selling me a tree, and they said, here's what you do. You rake back the soil on your Japanese black pine about an inch, and if you can see where it's damp, then don't water it until at least tomorrow. Check it again tomorrow and see if it's time. So that in itself was good advice. Was good advice. But I felt like I was struggling. I felt like I would get a tree that was nice and green, and it would go a little yellow, and I would worry, and I would feel a little heartsick, and it seemed like I was always trying to chase that balance. The first tree I got that greened up and stayed greened up, that was a pine, was this one. And at the time, it was the one that I cared the least about. It's like, why is it the tree that I worry the least about? Why is it the one that I'm probably slack on? Why is it doing better than the ones that I worry about, that I actually, wheeled and dealed over and hoped that I would get and brought home and all that stuff? They're not doing as well as the one that somebody gave me, that I was going, that's kind of an ugly tree, but I'll name it Sweet Potato and see what happens. And that ended up being, it always looked really, and it was because I was better at the watering. I wasn't so hung up or so worried about it. And at one point, watching videos on watering, I saw somebody talk about the wick system. The wick system. The wick system is, or the dipstick system, is where you take a little skewer. My favorite, $1,000 worth of bonsai tools and weenie skewers are my favorite thing. But the idea with that was you would take this weenie skewer and stick it in the soil, and you would have little weenie skewers in your pots. And when you came by and you pulled the stick and looked at it, kind of like looking at the thermometer, you would see a water level on there that would tell you how dry it was below the soil. I thought that was amazing. I did a video on that right away. I thought that was so eye-opening to me, that I think I went on and on about that for several videos. I think every time that we went out on the balcony for something, and I walked up and looked at something, I would pull the weenie skewer up out of the soil and have a look and see how wet it was, and gauge the soil by that. I just thought I was learning a lot. But you know what you don't see right now? Weenie skewers. There's not a single one in a pot anywhere to show you what or why I was doing that. And the reason is this: as great as I thought that was, I have moved on from that system because of what it taught me. It taught me how to even do better than that. And, I was just saying a minute ago how I would rake back the soil, engage the water that way. But they always still stayed a little yellow one way or another. Like riding a bicycle, I was just like not quite finding my balance. But until I started using those sticks, and what those little weenie skewers taught me was just how wet it is down in here. Raking the soil here doesn't really tell me much more than what's happening right here. And when I finally looks dry to me, and I go ahead and at that point say, yep, we can finally water, it still could be too soon, because only did I and I, at the time when I was using those weenie skewers, I was going, this is really teaching me something about how long it takes for inside the pot, not really out here, but inside here at this level, how long that takes to get drier. And pines need to be a little drier. Their roots are woody. I remember the first time I saw that, somebody pulled a bonsai tree, a little pine tree that they had gotten for free at a meeting, and it was in a little plastic bonsai pot. And when they pulled it out of that bonsai pot, the roots were in the same square that the little plastic bonsai pot. And it actually looked to me like a very, very dried out soap sponge. You know, that was my first time seeing somebody pull out a little pine tree and seeing what the roots look like. And I thought, that thing looks like a dead SOS pad or something, you know? That can't be and those are woody roots. And if you get those wet and they stay wet all the time, they rot on you. So you want them wet enough to take up the soil, to take up your nutrients and to take up the moisture and to carry all of that up through the trunk and the leaves, but they don't need to stay wet. And I would never have gotten, I remember at the time thinking about what I was learning with my skewers, I went, it would have taken me numerous repottings of Japanese black pines before I would have gotten the same kind of feel for what's going on down here that I finally got by using my little weenie skewers. I would just do this, and then when it came time to check on it, after a day of sitting there in there, I would check it and it would tell me how much soil was still in that, how much moisture was still in that soil. But you know what? I got better at it than the stick was, because the stick would still lie to you a little. I found that after I started getting a better feel for what was really going on down there, the stick would hold a little moisture longer than the substrate would. In other words, it was kind of being spongy. It would soak up the last little bit of moisture and kind of maintain a wet look. So at that point, that learning the frequency and learning why the frequency was based on what I was seeing off of that little piece of wood that I kept in there. And then once I realized that it was actually carrying a water signal a little longer than the soil would have actually told me had I been able to look at that. Those two little bits, that little bit of information added to what the dipstick taught me. And all of a sudden, I'd round the corner of what gave me the most trouble with my Japanese black pines, and a lot of my other trees too. If you find that you tend to have trouble with watering because of frequency and stuff, trees that are known for that, once you get them down, some of the other trees are easier. Also, the need to want to care for trees is high in us, or we wouldn't be doing bonsai. So having a bunch of larger, for instance, trees means that we would water them less frequently. And so I worry that am I being lazy? I don't think I'm being lazy. I think I actually want to water this. It's just not time to. Well, when will it be time to? Well, one way to kind of get over that little dilemma is by A, having more than one tree. B, the smaller the trees, the more frequently their little pots will need water. This guy gets watered almost every day. This guy sometimes gets watered twice a week. Sometimes this guy gets watered 4 times a week, and when the temperatures really go up, it gets watered every day. The oaks, they tell you they're drought resistant, which means they can go a long time without water, and then they'll just start dropping leaves before they die, so you've got a little heads up. But what they don't tell you is water them and they'll thrive. Water them and they'll thrive. Now this guy will actually, if it goes dry, you'll see the little tender shoots like this will lay over and be, if they've lost their hydraulics, they're laying over. Water, and an hour later, look at them again, and they will have already bounced back. But so this may sound like I'm recommending little weenie skewers in your bonsai pots to gauge your watering. I am not really. I'm saying that in the end, I was really amazed about what I have learned from those. And what I know now about watering is based on a sense of timing that I have a better understanding of because I was able to use those. So I would recommend the dipstick method, not as an end-all be-all, but as a training tool or training wheels. That's what they were. They were training wheels. I was flopping on over water, flopping on underwater, back and forth. And what I needed was background knowledge of how long it takes the core of the soil mass, the scion down there, the sheen. How long does it take the sheen underneath the tree to dry out? What was missing was that knowledge. In my mind's eye, it was drying out underneath there a lot sooner than it actually was. And that kept me in a frame of mind to always lean towards overwatering. When I started using the little weenie skewers, I began to get a better feel for how much water was down there. Even at the point where I was seeing no dampness up here, I was still seeing a lot of moisture on the stick for a day or two afterwards. And up until then, I was still pretty much relying on those readings. The problem with that is there comes a point where it wicks the rest of the water out of the soil. You can take that too long, is what I'm saying. But that information for me, that it can take too long to get a totally dry reading, was kind of like the last little bit of information. Once I'd figured out that, I didn't need them anymore. So in that way, those guys were very much like training wheels. So the reason I brought all of this up was we did get a fair amount of favorable comments in regards to the color and the look of our little pine trees. They do look like they're thriving here. I was really concerned about overwater because of the amount of rain, so that's why we did the shuffle the way they did. But once we moved through that and the water schedule was back to me again, that was based on something, and it really began to show in my Japanese black pines. And it also began to show up on my oaks. The first years I had oaks, I was worried that I would overwater them. You can't, you can drown them, you can. But if they're in a bonsai pot and it's confined and they're a big tree like that, and you give them plenty of water, the results will be prolific stuff. That and a little bit of food, and you can see how thick that is. but I'm going to drop in the label about what I learned about watering my Japanese black pines, and how I owe a lot of that education to a little weenie skewer stick. And no, I'm not using that now, but I did use them then. You know, if I probably haven't ridden a bicycle in this year. Used to ride a lot, but I doubt if a year or two off would mean that I would have to go find training wheels. You know, once you ditch those things, you found your balance and you're off and running. And that's a lot like what I would say. For me, learning to get my watering down pat on the little ones and on the big ones was really difficult. It took me a minute to get it down pat, and those skewers were a long way. Now, the kind of point that I drifted off on is the smaller the pot, the more frequently you do get to water. For instance, you shouldn't be watering ponderosas a whole lot, but yet this little guy in the temperature, I'm checking its temperature right now, means that I do get to water it more frequently than most people who would have larger ponderosas. Same with these tiny little pots. A lot of these guys get watered every day. Sometimes they don't. Like if, for instance, they look like they have stayed damper longer, maybe they don't dry out till late in the afternoon because it was a cloudy, overcast, damp day, and so they just kind of looked a little damp on the top, and then late in the afternoon, so it looked like they might could use some water. Well, I might still see where they don't really look like they need water in the next morning. So at that point, you know, we may not water every single day, or we may water later. But having said that, the smaller pines, even though their water to air ratio is probably close to 50-50, if you like having something to water every day, and you think you might be interested in black pines, the smaller they are, the more likely you are to be able to do that. It sounds like those kids are really enjoying that pool. God, if I was that excited, I mean, I get pretty excited, but I don't, I want what he's having, or she's having. This is going to be it. This is not going to be too long. It was just a little tip on what I basically learned trying to do black pines. The last piece of the puzzle for me and getting them to look better was to figure out the watering. So that's just something I want to pass along. You could probably go back in history on our thing and see where I was going nuts over those weenie skewers. But I would, just like everything else, I've adapted, I've moved on, and here's what I've moved on to, and here's what I would say about those. I would go back and say they were absolutely training wheels that put me on the right path to figuring out the things that I needed to know the frequency of watering. You just need to have a good feel for the information. Like and subscribe, you guys, if you haven't already. Why are you blurry? You're looking a little soft there. And we'll probably do another post taking us to our Friday, and that's just kind of how we roll. But thank you so much for watching.